Hello, and welcome to the live Printing Impressions webinar, Reducing Labor While Increasing Productivity for Digital Web Finishing, sponsored by MBO America. I'm Mark Michelson, Editor-in-Chief of Printing Impressions and the host of today's event. Before we get started, let me take a second to point out the Tips for Attendees widget on your console. It's the blue one with the wrench on it. You can always click this widget for more information. All right, so let's move on to today's webinar topic. Today we'll learn about more DM groups' path to higher productivity. As a high-volume direct mail producer in a tight labor market, more DM required finishing systems that could produce their letter-folded and multi-cut products at high rates of speed while also reducing labor. After a thorough consultation to determine its requirements, MBO America provided customized production lines to meet more DM's needs and with a payback of less than 2 years. During this webinar, you will learn how the direct mail operation increases letterfold production throughput 3 to 4 times its prior average speeds, how it automated and streamlined high-speed digital web finishing processes for multi-cut products, how you can maximize and streamline your workflow with continuous feed folding and cutting equipment, and ways to lower your labor and maintenance requirements for letterfold and multi-cut finishing. Today's featured speakers include Tanner Case, Enterprise Director of Engineering and Operations at More DM Group, and Lance Martin, VP National Accounts and Marketing at MBO America. I'd like to point out, too, that we should also have time for a Q&A session at the end of their formal presentations, so please be sure to submit any questions you may have during the course of today's webinar. Okay, Lance, as our first presenter today, let me turn the program over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Thanks, NAPCO, for putting this event on, and certainly thank you, Tanner, for joining us today. I think we've got a very interesting case study, or actually almost 2 case studies to go through. We're fortunate enough with More DM that we found 2 systems within the same year that we could work on together to increase its efficiency and get new equipment in place to make it much more profitable. So I'm going to just take a couple of moments here, the first part of the presentation, to just talk a little about MBO, because I think a lot of people might not know the depth that MBO has. I think this is the classic thing that people think about when they see MBO. They immediately see MBO, yeah, we make folders, and certainly that is true. The folder lineup you see on the screen is quite deep. It covers all the sheet sizes and most every offset type of production format that you can think of, and even on up into the grand formats, which get all the way out to the 57s and the 80-inch sheets. But what I want to make sure that we work on today is what MBO has done over the last few years to change its lineup and be much more in line with what's really happening on the commercial print market today. So as you can see by the timeline on your screen, back in '65 is when the company actually got started, and we had a monstrous push through the '85 area where it was establishing itself in America. And America became one of the largest portions of the business. And in '93, they actually built our Portugal manufacturing plant. Portugal served as a great cost base right near the port, and it was nearly 250,000 square feet worth of manufacturing, where it's raw materials in and functioning machines come out the other end. They also do machining and fabrication for other suppliers in the industry. So it's quite a well-rounded facility that has a lot of capability and a lot of volume. In 2000, we invested into the specialty group, Herzog & Hyman. They are now part of the MBO group back since 2000, and it's a very important player. They not only do some of the things that you might know as pharmaceutical work, but they do a lot of specialty paper handling and folding in the direct mail market and specialty markets, and we've integrated those into our product portfolio also. In 2007, we further added to the portfolio with Bolgrama and the die cutting solutions. And that has been one of the best moving pieces in our portfolio throughout the last couple of years. They not only have the rotary die cutter, but today we're going to talk about trimming and flatbed cutting that still goes on very frequently, and they have a way to put a lot of processes through those automated techniques. In 2008, we invested further into the digital web side of the business. MBO thought that the web solutions and the continuous forms printing was going to be a major player. I'm glad we did, because it's certainly turning out that way. And today you're also going to get a chance to look at what we did with more DM on the letterfold side of life. More recently, in 2013, we launched our new platforms of controls, which is going to have higher connectivity on throughout 2020. Many of the machines, the singular machines, were changed to controls back as early as 13 and 14. And now we've moved it through most all of our single folder line. It's moved into the digital line for 2020. And it will add some functionality and some depth to, say, data recovery and job management and JDF workflow and those sorts of things, which will all be coming to all the MBO products in a very short period of time. In 2015, I noted that as a rather big milestone, because the digital finishing solutions actually grew to nearly 50% of the business of the North American market. And I think that's very, very significant, because as I started this slide with what everybody thought MBO was, it always ended up being folding, and oh yeah, we make folders, but actually digital web finishing is very significant, and it's almost 50% of the business every year now. So we've also, in the last couple of years, put a lot of effort into working with partners. Some of the partners are up top. You see, it's the Mueller-Martini and Canon and HP types of companies providing all the print solutions on the front end, and with Mueller-Martini, a very robust stitching and binding solution in the back, where we can build the book block making and the saddle stitch making blocks that go into those products. And then we've continued the success through 2018 and 19, and at the trade show you're going to have a chance to see some new folders, some robotic deliveries, and palletizing solutions. You see there our new dynamic perf and soft anvil scoring unit, which I think is going to be a big plus for the web market. I wanted to point out some of the solution principles that we work on daily back here. We are very deeply rooted into a modular type of an environment. We believe in the modularity and we believe it gives us the customization techniques to put solutions together that are not necessarily cookie cutter. They remain flexible, and that modularity works in that favor. They're usually very durable. We come from the 24/7 commercial operations side of life, and we've kept that design criteria that way as we've continued to change and move our company. We've always been working towards a high-performance, high-volume type of a product and a marketplace. And then recently, as you saw, the partnerships to expand our capabilities, and that includes the automation. And then what you'll see today is rather than just purely automating a machine and putting, say, a control package on a machine to do a particular function, removing process steps has fallen into the category of this automation, and putting a single process together that can do 3 or 4 or 5 steps instead of one or all in one, rather than having it all as a separate step, has been a big plus in the last few years towards making everybody much more profitable in this environment with these short turnarounds and the high labor problems. So this is our focus in the markets. Today you're going to get a chance to see more DM solutions that goes around the digital finishing market, and it hits the direct mail pieces of our industry. And a little bit of a general commercial type of an environment, and you can see I put this gray area bounding box over the top 2 boxes of digital and commercial, because this is truly in the last, say, year, more so than ever, we see those 2 markets come together completely. the quality of the print, the ability to manage the data, the finishing solutions that are being provided, all have moved that into the commercial printer for the high volume business. And we think that's very significant. It's no longer just in transactional or statement type shop environments. It's truly a commercial print tool. And then also the die cutting and the pharma specialty are part of our focuses in America. Today we are going to, as I said, talk to more DM Group just a little while. We worked on a couple of projects that are focused on reducing labor, and also they reduced steps and turnaround time. So we're going to have two solutions. I believe Tanner will be talking first of all about the letters, and we analyzed the older letterfold situation that they had, and we would be able to turn that into a higher speed solution with a lot less touches and a higher throughput in general. The notepad solution that they had going on in the plant, we called that a multi-cut solution because those notepads were printed in a high volume environment, multi-up, 3, 4, and 5 up at times, and I believe we'll talk about one of those today showing the cutting solution that was put together to do that all in line rather than using the manual operations. So the reason why we think this is a great webinar for everybody to take a look at is because not only are the processes very common in our commercial marketplace, but they were facing all the same types of things that I'm sure we all are. They're competing in a very high, tight labor market. It's difficult to find people all the time. The attrition tends to be high on many of the positions. And of course, as we all know, costs are going up. So getting the automation and reduced steps and higher throughput was a big deal. They were attacking some high maintenance and high labor focused areas. The maintenance situation on older equipment was always becoming an issue. The more machine downtime there is and the more maintenance time you have to put in, of course, the less productive it is. We worked with them much more on a consultative and analysis type of an approach. We truly don't walk into these types of situations with a brochure and try to sell a box. It doesn't work that way. These are all situations where we work together and try to form a partnership to understand what they do and put together a solution that fits their model and not try to jam the situation into an existing product or a model number that already has design specs in it. And we also think that this is very applicable to the market because the payback goals were still the 2 to 3 year range, which I believe is where most people are in the marketplace. Having projects that run out 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years nowadays it's just not possible because our market is just too fast-paced. Our letterfold solution is basically this. Starts with a roll, and it was near line, runs through, finishing to get the proper imposition and folding formats coming up through the sheeter. And then we put MBO's traditional style buckle folders in play to make things such as 3-panel, 4-panel, half folds. It can do 2-pagers, 4-pagers. It's infinitely variable, and the speeds can run up to 800 feet a minute. And there's also options for banding of stacks, and we can add in dynamic perfing as needed and scoring. So this is where our background came from. It's a very strong player in the United States. This is probably our highest focus in the market, and you'll see most placements in the direct mail market by MBO in this space. In his original process, we were looking at equipment that looked like this. I'm going to let Tanner describe it more deeply as in his part of the presentation, but as you can see here, it was an unwind. It was going into a chop cutter, and then on the back side did happen to be an MBO folder with a short delivery. These machines are all over the marketplace. They're commonly referenced to as a chop cut. And those products tend to run, a little bit slower, actually quite a bit slower. The high-speed line shown earlier in this photo here is what we replaced it with. These tend to run 3 to 4 times the speed with actually the same or less labor that was being put in play on that earlier line. So the ROIs on these projects are really quite good, and we look at these first usually, and most of the time they come out quite well. And the second product you're going to see, or analysis you'll see today, is something a little bit different that you might not know of from MBO, and this would be involving a trimming and cutting solution. MBO supports the Bogramma series of cutters and die cutters, and we had an opportunity in a notepad type of an environment where it was a multi-up product, and they were using a guillotine cutter like so to cut and trim all these booklets, and there was a very large volume of it, and it was quite a bottleneck. So the new line looks like so, and once again we were looking at trade-offs in volumes and such that were 3 and 4 to 1 over the original production. So these are the types of things we look for when we work with our customers, and I think you'll get a chance today to see some of the numbers that went behind it, and maybe they could apply to some of the things that you guys are doing also. So I think I'll take a second and introduce Tanner. He's the Enterprise Director of Engineering and Operations at More DM Group. Tanner, I think I'll turn it over to you, and thank you for participating today.
All right. Thanks, Lance. I appreciate that. And Mark and NABCO, thank you for having me do this, and all the attendees that are here today. Give you a little overview about me, and then I'll go into More DM Group. I've worked for More DM Group for about 9 years. I started from the ground as an operator and worked my way up. After graduating with an international business degree, I came to them and suggested that they need someone in this position in order to help at an executive level make decisions for efficiencies in equipment, so that as it was being implemented, that whatever the purpose was, it was being delivered onto the floor. And so we did a first project, and within the first 30 days, we've seen that, yeah, it was necessary to have that ground level knowledge when it comes to implementing this equipment to make sure that payback period and everything is being effective. More DM Group was established in 2005, consists of 32 companies. 7 of the companies are production facilities, about 650 customers, and our sales for 2018 around $500 million. We're a complete service marketing agency, so we handle everything from digital to campaign creation to media creation, all the way to the caging. We're a full-service shop. We also deal some in media, and now we're also starting to get into big data. We're just now getting started into that. Okay. So as we increased our capacity and increased our client base, we were trying to figure out a better way to produce the mail. And the Resource One facility does around 30 to 40 million pieces a month. That's just at this facility. The other facilities do just about as much and not quite at the same capacity. So there was 2 areas that we were looking at for improvement, and one of them was in the letter folding line, specifically an 8.5 by 14 double parallel fold. That's where we do a lot of the work, and this is on a 60-pound offset paper. And the other one was with notepad production. So I originally started overseeing the notepad production when I began, and at that point we were doing 3 to 4 million notepads. Last year we were close to 45 million, and now this year we're probably going to be closer to 60 million notepads. And so the thing that we were faced with was, how do we increase our capacity in the cutting while reducing labor? Because guillotine cutting, when it comes to notepad production, is extremely difficult. We were running 3 guillotines, 12-hour shifts, 12 people in order to accomplish that. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. The challenges that we're currently facing right now in the market, one that I'm kind of taking under my wing, it's kind of near and dear to my heart, would be employee satisfaction. So this it's kind of a byproduct of productivity. We all get focused in on trying to get the job done, but when it comes to retention of employees and keeping people around and making sure they want to do a good job, has to do with employee satisfaction. So we're starting to get more into detail as far as when we do get new equipment, who is the best fit for that equipment in order to make it productive. It may not be the best operator, it may be a new person, and I'll get more into detail about the training part of that. Increasing the workforce. So this constraint, all the companies I've been to are kind of under this constraint of trying to increase the workforce. And when we started approaching this, I was challenging everyone that maybe we should not so much look at increasing the workforce, but where is it that we can decrease the workforce and put in newer equipment or other processes, alumini, stackers, whatever we can do to reduce the workforce, reduce the labor, and let's not just try to hire more and more people, but let's see if we can actually eliminate some jobs and maybe increase our wages as a way to enter the market a little bit better. The equipment investment, we're making investments monthly now. Everything from envelope converters to folders to finishing products. We're on the forefront trying to either buy the next latest and greatest or stuff that has been proven. If it's been proven here at the main facility, we'll go ahead and purchase it and put it at one of the other sister companies. The increase in operation costs, this is something we're all trying to control all the time. The paper costs right now, so we're trying to buy in bigger bulks so that we can decrease the cost there. And transportation, where can we eliminate transportation costs so that the customer, this doesn't go down to them. And then time constraints. Right now is the season of the busy work. Everyone is trying to get everything out by the end of the year. Shops are over capacity. Clients are behind. And so just trying to deal with all of those constraints that even if the deadline was missed on the front end, on the back end, things still have to be out the door in order to meet the client's needs. So that's a constant thing that we're trying to juggle. And increase wages. With all the bigger facilities coming in, we're constantly trying to figure out how we can increase the wages to increase our retention and keep employees around so that they're not wanting to go to the Amazon or Walmart or McDonald's because we know that the minimum wage is increasing. So this is kind of what the MBO equipment folding line looked like when I did the analysis in 2018. And the one thing I would suggest that if anyone's going to go and they look at investing in new equipment, and it doesn't really matter where it is, make sure you maximize your current equipment. Don't just take your old data and make your future decision based off that data. Take your current equipment and max that out and figure out where the bottleneck is, because you may not need to go purchase a brand new piece of equipment. So first maximize what you have and establish that baseline, and then when you do your cost analysis, do it from that. Don't do it from the historical data that maybe has been decreased over time. So when we look at the existing equipment, it was at 1.5 operators. We would have 2 people going in between 2 folders, or it would be a trainee on that folder and an operator. Machine downtime was 47%. Due to roll changes, due to the unwind, we have belt-driven unwind, so the curling of paper, tearing of paper, overtime percentage. The overtime percentage is about the amount of overtime that we run. Even currently, that's where it's at. We maximized our machine speed at 147. Normally, it would probably be around 100, but we got up to 147. And then the bottleneck was either the speedo or the unwind, and we couldn't really get it much faster than that. Obviously, the folder could handle higher speed, but we couldn't get beyond the 147. And then the payback period for that equipment is variable because a lot of it's used equipment, somewhere between 1 to 3 years. So when we went to MBO, the idea was that we wanted to run this equipment with 1 operator, not 2. And even the equipment, we've recently made another purchase. We're going to a Palomides to make it easier for the one person that's doing the operation. And the machine downtime has decreased, so it's a shaft-driven unwind. So the downtime has improved significantly, and the roll changes. The machine's running at a faster rate, so the operators are just more urgent about running the equipment, making roll changes, doing all that. So we've seen the decrease in downtime. And then the cost of operation has decreased. Overtime is the same. The max speed, the thing I'm trying to work on right now is the evacuation of the paper. So we need a new vacuum system in order to evacuate the paper at the higher speed. But we're still able to net 427, and we're going to get a newer equipment in here that runs at the faster speed, along with evacuation systems that have the CFM to support that equipment. So I do see these numbers increasing. But the overall increase in production is about 34%, and the payback period is around 2 years. So the trimming line that we had kind of went over, this was one that was probably the most significant that we had due to the amount of notepads that we produce. We not only produce them for this facility, but we also produce them for all of the sister companies. And when I was doing the analysis on this, the thing that I was looking at was all of the time that was being wasted for the operators and the helpers as they were turning the stacks in the machine. So there was a lot of just downtime that could be eliminated. Also, the cleaning of the equipment, the changing of the blades, there's a lot of stuff that had to take place in order to run that equipment. So when we were looking at this, it took looking at just one guillotine cutter, took 2 operators. So you have an operator and a helper on there. Machine downtime about 47%. Overtime is the same. Machine speed, so this is the number of notepads in an hour that they could cut. So around 11,000. And we were using equipment that was obviously older, used, and it's the same payback period. So with the newer equipment, we're looking at same operators, but we're trying to increase our throughput. So could we get more with the same 2 operators? So 2 operators, machine downtime is at 30%. And the big improvement here is the machine speed. So we basically cut 2/3 or increased by 2/3, decreased our labor by 2/3. This was a significant difference when it comes to the notepad production, which would most of the time take 3, sometimes 5 cutters in order to produce the amount of notepads. We can now do it with just 1 machine. And the payback period is around 30 months on this one. I will go back to this one real quick. One of the biggest things, so we had a job that was about $6.5 million here just recently, and we were trying to have this done a month early. Last year, without this equipment, there was no way that we could do it, but this year we were trying to decide if we could get this done a month early in order to open up shop capacity. And when we started producing this, it looked like it was almost impossible to do it. But once we started running, we didn't have to run the equipment full time, and we ended up getting it done more than a month early, and the inserters never stopped. And all the material was cut and ready for the mail shop. So it was proven the investment of the cutting from MBO on this one. So this is an example of how we go about with the payback period. This isn't the actual numbers, but this is an example of how we would do it. So if the equipment price was at $47,000, additional costs, so if there is freight or any other thing associated to getting it there, loan period of 5 years, interest rate of 6%, monthly payment, excuse the typo there, the interest is $7,595, so a total investment of $56,000. So the proposed savings is $15,000. Savings per month is $1,250. and then additional equipment savings, maybe electrical or labor, there's additional savings in there. Comes down to a net savings of about 15,603, so about 3.62 years on that one. So you'd be looking at maybe you could do something a little bit better in order to get that closer to 2 years. We will do things on 2 years, but we always try to get closer to 3 or closer to 2 years. So the cutting that we've put in here, the equipment we brought in for the finishing of these notepads, has not only improved the output of the mail shop, but has also increased the quality of the product that we're making. It is a more exact cut and more consistent cut. So as the people are receiving it, they're more satisfied with the end product. Also, we're able to keep our inventory levels higher for other facilities and take on more work. Last year, even some of the equipment that we had outsourced, some of the projects we'd outsourced to other companies, we ended up bringing back in-house and cutting them here because we had that open capacity. The reduction in labor costs, this is a significant one. We're able to reposition and take employees that we had. So if originally it took 12 people to do it, now it takes 2 to do it. We'll take those 10 people and move them into a department where we're needing people. Our mail shop right now is needing people, so we're able to reallocate labor just by having that one piece of equipment in here. And then into the letter folding. The letter folding here has increased to 34%, and this is just with the one facility. And the other 2 facilities that we have are faced with the same challenges of labor and trying to increase their capacity. So in order to help them out, we had went out and purchased 2 more pieces of equipment in order to help them increase their capacity there, because they were impressed with the amount of work that we could get done on one folder here. The budget, so we're able to operate in our departments below the budget right now when it comes to the finishing. So the folding and the cutting, we have seen a decrease in their budget there. Now we're trying to figure out how we can get the same amount of savings in other areas. And then the quantity. So obviously there's an increase in production, but some of these jobs take a large amount of preparation before the mail date. So some of these have extra processes at the end once it's been inserted, and it has to be staged and ready. So some of these jobs may be $5 or $6 million and need to be done ahead of time. So we are now able to produce that and get it pushed out to the other departments or outsource to other companies and bring it back and still maintain the mail dates for our clients.
All right. Thank you, Tanner. We've got some questions that have come in, and we do have time for a Q&A here, so I encourage our viewers to please submit any questions you may have for either Lance or Tanner. Tanner, let's start out with one for you. How easy or difficult was it or is it to train the operators and the mechanics on the new machines?
So when it comes to the training of the operators, the motto that I've taken here, and I've overseen all the new equipment. So any equipment that is brought in, I oversee it at the initial investment side, and then I also see it once it's onto the floor, and then I oversee the training and oversee the whole entire process. So gone through it several times. One thing that I've learned is that in most cases, if you bring in a brand new piece of equipment and it's kind of new to everyone, that's to take a new operator that has a lot of ability but maybe is not an expert at the traditional equipment or doesn't have a lot of experience, and get them trained by a technician and get them trained to run the machine at the speed necessary and get them trained to run it without putting all the specialties on it of tape and strap and wire and all of that, and get them trained. And then once they learn it, then you're pretty well set. The challenge that we've had is that when you take an experienced operator, you try to put them on this equipment, they are less willing to run it at a high rate of speed, and they also want to put their homemade twist on it with either tape or wire or adjustments, and it kind of, you can't really maximize the equipment because when it needs to run fast, it has to be set up the way according to the book. And so the training's easy. The training's fairly easy if you take a new employee that has ability and you train them according to the book with the technician, and then they know what the standards are. If you take a traditional person that has maybe some not so good habits, it's a little bit more difficult to get the same output from the same machine. So I have, for this equipment, I have 3 trainers, 3 people that were brand new that I had trained, and they all do a really good job, and I have 1 person that had experience. That kind of tells you the mix of new people versus experienced people in order to get the equipment to run.
Okay. This question also
so
for
Mark,
you, Tanner. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to, those are great points. I have maybe just a little bit more to add from a manufacturer's standpoint when we do our training. We've kind of adopted a new method, not new, I guess it's just more or less seeing what worked and doesn't work. We have the luxury that most of the time we're working with people that know our equipment, say folders. You know, they may very well have anywhere from 1 to 10 folders in their building that they've been working with for years. And there's a presumption many times that, oh, well, we know how to run the folders, don't worry about it. And what Tanner said is really key. Most of these environments that we're putting these new machines in, they're not ROI'd based on the, the speeds that you've seen in the older days coming from these machines. If we just let those types of practices come into the newer machine market, you end up getting the same types of things going on in the new environment that you did in the old one. And so we do try to train the people on running at a higher speed for the types of products that we're working on, and that can be a little bit scary at times. We also have to make sure that the delivery side of the equation is really in good standing. If we're trying to put a lot of product through a delivery that is rather what I would call labor intensive, you saw the old picture from Tanner's process. If you would try to just use a similar delivery, a shorty that would take product at 400 or 500 feet a minute, the operator just physically would be overrun, and they're naturally going to just not, you're going to leave the button running it a lot slower. So that's one. And the other one is we found during our process that we'd put the machinery in, and then as soon as the machinery is on, we'd start a training, if you would, a week to work with the operators and such and go through the machinery. And many times we found that the customer was putting they'd just be, well, let's grab a live job, throw down there, and we'd start training on that. And we found that what happens is when you put a live job on the machine and you begin to train to the live job, you get a very specific skill set trained into your operator to run that type of work. And you may be on it for days or certainly for hours. So you get what you get with the training. So now what we've changed to is a second week where we ask the company not to put a live job on. And our operators go in and they set a job up, but then they will make changes. They'll show how a fold is not working quite well, or the web's not quite tracking through the machine right, or the tension's not right, and what happens to it then. And the operators then get a chance to go fix that. And then when we leave, they can run that job, and they are not so dependent upon us to actually run the job. And we think that's a pretty nice way to go about it if the company can afford that extra week to do that.
I would
Sorry,
add
Rick.
something to what Lance had just said. That's one important thing when bringing in new equipment, even if it's an experienced operator or a new operator, is making sure that there's plenty of test material in order to get that operator comfortable with what's going on. Because all of the processes that have to do with the live job, maybe it's the writing of sequence numbers, entering that information into the computer, samples, there's all of this extra stuff that has to be done with a live job that an operator begins to stress out, and they don't really focus on learning the equipment. They're more worried about, oh, I have 500 read keys I have to redo, or they have a lot of other issues. So accounting for, is it 2 or 3 rolls, or is it a roll of test paper that you need for 4 hours in order to get that operator comfortable with the adjustment, so when the live job comes, they know what to do, because you do see a lot of times where someone gets stressed out and not really wanting to learn the equipment just because of the stress of the live job.
Okay. This question came in, and it also kind of refers to the people issue. And this gentleman wanted to know, was this project initiated by the workforce migrating to other places, or was it, in fact, the lack of workforce?
No, what this had to do with is just an overall improvement. So when I walk the floor, I walk the plant, I see that, okay, there's this job, and it's that we got 100 million pieces of this job that we do a year. To me, there's a lot of room for improvement right there when I see that on 5 or 6 machines. And so the question just is in the back of my head, how can we reallocate those people? It always comes down to workforce. Like right now, it's always how can we decrease our labor costs? And so with this initial one, in order to get a million pieces done within a short period of time, it would have to be on 4 to 6 folders. And that was just kind of the driving question, is how do we eliminate those when we need to get a million pieces done in a short period of time? What piece of equipment is out there in order to accomplish that?
Okay. Tanner, this one's also for you. How did you make the decision to be in line with the web or near line?
It just comes down to the bottleneck of the printer. These obviously can run faster than our digital line, and a lot of our digital line runs a lot of different folds, a lot of different materials. This particular folder is set up for either 8.5 by 11 or 8.5 by 14 letterfold or double parallel fold, so it's pretty specific. While that the digital printer will print a large range of jobs, and so it didn't really make sense to have it in line, because there would be a lot of times that it would just be sitting there because we have to run other work.
Follow-up question to that about how to determine the floor layout of the equipment. You know, obviously plants tend to be very, very crowded, and space is at a premium, so you really have to really think it out ahead of time as to, you know, what the layout's going to be. How did you go through that process?
So anytime we're in a plant, always try to look at the general flow of things. So how is the work going to flow through the plant? So obviously you want to go from printing either a digital or conventional and going into your bindery line, and then into your mail shop line, and into the final product and to outbound mail. And so initially you always want to think, you know, where does that equipment best fit in the flow of things? Even if you don't have space there, what could we do to make space in order to get to where it fits in the flow fine, so that when people walk the plant or see the plant, it makes sense that we don't have a folder sitting over in mail shop, but it's actually in the bindery line. So that's kind of the first initial thing. And then the other thing that I look at personally is eye appeal. So if we have clients that are in, or if we're doing a tour of the facility, obviously we're not going to be able to show the whole entire facility the amount of time that's necessary to do a tour. So I always try to get the best equipment close to where we're doing tours so that people can see the range of equipment that we have and the latest and greatest, so that they get an opportunity to kind of see the way the plant is just by doing a quick tour. So every time we get new equipment, I always go off of those two things. Obviously, the first one being efficiency and how does it lay out in the plant. And then the other one on top of that is there a place that we can put it so that as the clients come in, they can see that we are investing in new equipment, that we're not running just a bunch of old equipment that's running slow, to help reduce their labor costs to them as well.
You know, Lance, I guess just to add on to that, as a manufacturer, I mean, how are you helping your customers, you know, helping them with sort of the layout of the equipment and, you know, to maximize sort of the workflow productivity? How are you and your team coming in and helping people do that?
Yeah, well, we certainly are much more of an analytical type of a company. The solutions that you see in these types of presentations and such are really not something that you walk up and say, I want, you know, model number A52-1 and ship it out the door, and we launch it, and when it gets there, we just let the customer uncrate it and plug it in. Certainly, there's a lot of planning that goes on, and you heard Tanner also talk about waste evacuation. These are, I suppose they're not quite as complicated as a printing press where you have a lot of fluids coming to the press and such, but you still have got quite a few services coming to the machine that have to be planned out. You have high pressure air. There's usually vacuum and low pressure air somewhere on the machines. There's the scrap evacuation, and then just moving skids in and out at volumes of 500 foot a minute, and your letter is, even if you said your letter is a foot long, which is a little bit longer than normal, you know, that things are coming off the end of there at 30,000 pieces an hour, and if it's a two-stream, it's 60, and even if it's a nested 4-pager, it's coming off there in the thickness of 60. And skids build up quick, stacks come off the back quick. So we do our best to impart some of that, of what we've seen around the area. And then when we see certain things and speeds and volumes approaching certain numbers, we can recommend certain automated back ends that will slow that whole process down and allow one person to be managing it much more easy than the more traditional ways. Hope that answered what you were going for.
Yeah. A few questions have come in related to paper. You know, Lance, maybe direct this one to you. What types of paper are able to be run from the roll stock?
Well, we really don't have too many restrictions on paper going through the machinery, whether it be gloss or dull or matte or any of the finishes or uncoated text stocks, the book weights. As a matter of fact, from a roll standpoint, the sheeting line actually, if you're actually doing the real light stocks, down even into the 40 GSMs and those sorts of numbers in some of those PI and pharmaceutical applications, we actually see a little bit easier to deal with the papers running it from a roll into a sheeter than trying to deal with it from a sheet. So many times, and I think that's an overlying qualifier in the market. In general, what we see is the natural tendency from a press standpoint is to sheet it. And you know, if you can sheet it into a B2 or some sort of a size that's everybody kind of is used to in the old days from the offset world or your mailing world, then you just deal with the sheets running around the building. And we really try to recommend that situation, or to not do that situation. We find that if we can handle it from a roll, many times the machinery will run better or faster than any time it's sheeted, and we try to then produce a machine in the finishing department that pulls sheets and runs them that fast. And typically, that's a challenge. I mean, especially with the glossy stocks or the UV coatings or any of those sorts of things, that ends up you're looking at a very staticky situation. You could get blocking in the feeder. The feeders don't stack well necessarily when the sheets have a little curl in them. So you're dealing with all kinds of little things that happen, when you're just making a sheet. And that's a classic, right? Well, just make a sheet and then pass the sheets to the finishing. Finishing guys will figure it out. So what we found from that roll standpoint, and this is why we typically have, I bet you we are 90, maybe Mark, 97% of our lines out in the field are near line, not in line, because we find the presses can run incredibly well. Once you set those things up and roll them and get a rewind situation going, and they just don't shut off, and they run very fast, full speed. There's no finishing to shut them down. There's no tension issues usually. Even an easy, sheet to make, a little 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17 sheeter, it's going to have a problem at some point in time, and you've got to do some sort of setup in there. And going to roll just doesn't have that. And then you push all that down into the finishing world and let those guys that are talented in doing the finishing side of life do that. And we find that keeps the press running its maximum. And that's your most expensive investment. Why not keep it running at 95% or better in efficiency? Put the issues into the finishing area where that's actually what the finishing guys are trained to take care of.
So
Tanner, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, some of the experiences that we've had, the stock is a huge thing, especially when you start getting into higher speeds, even with the cutter, and I'll explain both of them. But when it comes to the MBO and the high-speed folding line, the biggest thing is roll management. So if the roll's coming off of either the digital line or you're using a conventional, the rolls have to be square. You can't have bowls. So whatever problems you have before it gets to the folder, make sure those is addressed, because if there's any variation within that roll, it just kind of throws off the whole process. And also, like, you have to have, like, when you're pulling away the trim, if you're pulling away at a high rate of speed, we found that if you try to go smaller than a half inch, or you start trying to reduce the amount of weight that you're trimming off, it begins to break on you, and you start beginning to see downtime. So we try to get a half inch on either side or a quarter inch on either side. Anything below that, it then starts screwing with your speeds and again starts messing with your downtime. And the other thing that we had learned is on our digital press, we had to increase our clean out line or spit line. It used to be 3/16, we had to increase it up to 7 millimeter, so that as it's evacuating, it can get that chip out of the way and it doesn't come through the sheeter and into your folder. So those are two slight adjustments that we had to make in order to get to the maximum speed. And there's even times now where you'll have to shut down the press and address a rewind issue that normally you wouldn't have to do. You could go ahead and just send it to the bindery line. And the last thing I'll add there is the core size. We try to have at least a 9-inch core, so that as it gets down to the base of that core, that the paper's not curled and they can keep it at a decent rate of speed. If you're just putting it on a traditional 3 to 6-inch core and you're not putting a butt roll on, when they get down to that lower where those final names are, it's so curly that they have a hard time keeping it at the speed that they need. And then on the cutting side of it, we were doing a 60-pound offset and just simply changed brands. And what had happened is you lose integrity of the paper, and so you get a lot of curling and a lot of issues as it was going through and being padded. So when it got to the trimming, where the glue spine was, there was variation in that spine because they were having issues at the feeder or with curling. And so we had to go all the way back and go back to the original brand that we had started with and make sure that that is the brand that's always used in order to make sure that you can maintain the quality for that equipment. So before anyone goes and says, oh, we can get a good deal on a truckload of paper, there needs to be a test run and to figure out that is it going to be ideal for that equipment, or does it need to go to a traditional equipment so you're not jeopardizing your speeds.
Some great advice there. This is also a paper-related question, Tanner. How heavy of a stock can you use on a buckle fold line like the one you're talking about in today's webinar?
So the folding line that we have, the high-speed one, we do everything on 60-pound offset. That's where the majority of all of the work is. On our digital line, we run heavier stocks, no coated stocks, but we'll go up to 7-point. But once we get beyond, we'll go 60-pound, 70-pound for the MBO. And then beyond that, it goes to a traditional line because it usually has other processes, a drop cut or additional folds. Everything that is on the MBO, we try to keep either 60 or 70 pound and large runs. So I'm always trying to keep it. Don't put a job on there unless it's over 500,000 pieces. Anything less than that, it kind of is a waste of time. So we always try to put the big, long runs on that equipment in order to keep the changeover, the amount of changeover down for that equipment.
So Mark,
is that what you're seeing? It's similar scenarios?
Yeah, I can add a little bit to the paper conversation. We deal with this as you add to the portfolio of products and it goes from the letterfold on into the self-mail market, you'll see people, and that postcard market too. A buckle folding line, as a rule of thumb for a lot of us, we always say somewhere right around 6 or 7 point, which is 6 or 7 thousandths of an inch stock. And of course, it depends on the stock and the thickness and the coating and all those sorts of things. But that's a general rule of thumb to start, thinking about it. Buckle folding is about at its limit. So if we're doing a traditional buckle fold job and you're running a 9-point or a 10-point, we would actually recommend that you change that and move more to a plow scenario. And I think many of the attendees are probably familiar with that. But what we would do then is the sheeter would sheet the product and take that sheet and register it and go on to more of a folder gluer type of an environment. So in that case, we have a plow table that would take the sheet down and plow one flap over the other and plow the other flap over the other and then glue it closed and so on to do self-mail type work. And that we see, that's really common from, say, 6-point up to 10. And then I think, my experience, that's about the limit from a thickness standpoint that I've seen most of the time on the printing presses for webs. I think it kind of stops there.
Okay. Maybe one final question for Tanner. Were there any unplanned events that you came across at all after installing the equipment, or has it all been smooth sailing?
No, I think there's always kind of ones that are unforeseen. Probably the biggest one for us was the evacuation system, the CFM, to support that equipment. I think that has been the biggest surprise to us. And, we're able to have a portable evacuation system, and now we're going to go and put in a whole new main system, but kind of missed the ball on that one. And so you kind of had some issues you had to work through when it comes to the chip trying to evacuate or the pin feeds. And so that was one that we kind of had to reevaluate and kind of go back to baseline and how we're readjusting as we make new investments.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. Well, unfortunately, it looks like we're just about out of time today. On behalf of Printing Impressions, I want to personally thank Tanner and Lance for presenting, to MBO America for sponsoring this educational event, and especially you, our audience, for attending today's webinar. Be sure to check out our webinar page to get information on all of our archived and upcoming webinars. If you would just take a minute to fill out the brief feedback survey that will appear on your screen next, we'd be most grateful, because your feedback will help influence the webinars we bring you in the future. Hope to see you at the next Printing Impressions webinar.